Have you ever wondered what it feels like to discover that the person you trust most in life looks you straight in the eyes and lies shamelessly about where they spent $40,000 of your money? I found out in the worst possible way. Imagine discovering that you missed your own son's wedding because your daughter-in-law decided you weren't important enough to be there. That's exactly what happened to me. After years of financially supporting my son David and his girlfriend Amanda, doing everything I could to give them a comfortable life, making countless sacrifices to ensure they never had to worry about money, I asked what I thought was a simple, innocent question. When will your wedding be? Her answer came with a cruel smile that I'll never forget. You missed it. It was yesterday. In that moment, standing in my own living room, looking at the woman I had treated like a daughter for 3 years, I felt something break inside me. It wasn't just my heart. It was my entire understanding of what family meant. I realized that my generosity had created people who saw me only as a source of money, not as family, not as a mother, not as a human being with feelings. My name is Margaret. I'm 58 years old, and this is the story of how I discovered that unconditional love without boundaries can become the perfect trap for those who want to exploit your kindness. This is the story of how I learned that sometimes the people closest to us can become our greatest predators. But it's also the story of how I found my way back to myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to show you how a mother's love can slowly transform into a weapon used against her. 3 years ago, my son David was 26 years old and struggling to find his place in the world. He had graduated from college with a degree in marketing, but the job market was tough, and he was living paycheck to paycheck in a tiny studio apartment that smelled like mold and broken dreams. When he introduced me to Amanda, I was genuinely happy for him. She was beautiful, articulate, and seemed to genuinely care about David. She had this way of looking at him that reminded me of how I used to look at his father before everything fell apart. Amanda came from a difficult background. Her parents had abandoned her when she was 16, and she had been bouncing between foster homes and friends' couches ever since. When she told me her story, with tears in her eyes and David's protective arm around her shoulders, my maternal instincts kicked in immediately. Here was a young woman who had never experienced the security of a loving family, and here was my son, head over heels in love with her. I saw an opportunity to not just help David, but to give Amanda the family support she had never had. The first time I helped them financially, it seemed so natural, so right. David called me on a Tuesday evening, his voice tight with stress. Their landlord was threatening eviction because they were 3 months behind on rent. The total was $1,800, money that would have been devastating for them to lose, but was manageable for me. I had worked hard my entire life. After my divorce from David's father 10 years earlier, I had built a successful consulting business from scratch. I lived modestly, saved diligently, and had always planned to use my money to help my family when they needed it. So I transferred the money without hesitation. Then relief in David's voice, the grateful tears in Amanda's eyes when they came to thank me in person. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. I was being the mother I had always wanted to be. But what I didn't realize was that I had just opened a door that would never close again. Over the next few months, the requests became more frequent. Car repairs, medical bills, groceries when money was tight, help with David's student loan payments. Each request came with a compelling story, a genuine emergency, and always with the promise that this would be the last time. Amanda had a particular talent for presenting these requests. She would call me, her voice soft and vulnerable, explaining how embarrassed she was to ask, how much she hated being a burden, but how desperate their situation had become. She would tell me how grateful she was to have me in her life, how she had never had a mother figure who cared about her the way I did, and I ate it up, every word. I started paying their rent directly to the landlord. Then I took over their car insurance, then their health insurance, then their grocery bills. Before I knew it, I was essentially funding their entire lifestyle. But it didn't feel like I was being taken advantage of. It felt like I was building a family. Amanda would call me every few days just to chat. She would ask for my advice about everything from career decisions to what to cook for dinner. She would tell me about her day, share her dreams and fears. and always end our conversations by telling me how much she loved me. David seemed happier than I had ever seen him. The stress lines around his eyes disappeared. He started talking about the future with excitement instead of anxiety. He would bring Amanda to family dinners, and we would spend hours talking and laughing around my kitchen table. For the first time since my divorce, my house felt like a home again. When they announced their engagement after 2 years together, I was overjoyed. I immediately offered to help with the wedding costs, imagining myself helping Amanda choose her dress, planning the reception, being part of every detail of this momentous occasion. They accepted my offer with enthusiasm. Amanda hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "I'm so lucky to have you as my future mother-in-law. You're the mother I always dreamed of having." I started a separate savings account specifically for their wedding. I researched venues, collected brochures from caterers, and even started a Pinterest board with decoration ideas. I was more excited about this wedding than I had been about my own. But as the months passed, something strange started happening. Whenever I asked about wedding plans, they would give me vague answers. "We're still figuring things out," Amanda would say. "We want to make sure everything is perfect." When I offered to go dress shopping with Amanda, she would smile and say, "That's so sweet of you, but I want to surprise everyone with my choice." When I asked about the guest list, David would say, "We're keeping it small and intimate, Mom. You know how Amanda feels about big crowds." I did know. Amanda had told me many times about her social anxiety, how large groups made her uncomfortable. I respected that and told them I understood completely. But I started to feel like I was being kept at arm's length from the very event I was helping to fund. The requests for money continued, but now they were wedding-related. Deposits for venues, payments to photographers, costs for flowers and decorations. Each time, they would show me beautiful pictures of what they had chosen, and I would transfer the money gladly, imagining how perfect everything would be. I calculated that I had spent more than $50,000 on them over 3 years. Rent, groceries, car payments, insurance, clothes, dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend trips, Amanda's dental treatment, David's professional wardrobe, and now the wedding expenses. But I didn't mind. This was my family. This was what family did for each other. The morning I asked about the wedding date, I was in my kitchen making coffee, feeling particularly happy. I had just received a bonus from one of my biggest clients, and I was thinking about surprising David and Amanda with a honeymoon trip to Europe. I called David's phone, but Amanda answered. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, using the pet name I had started calling her months earlier. "I was just wondering if you two had finally set a date for the wedding. I want to make sure I don't schedule any work trips around that time." There was a pause. Then I heard that laugh, a sound I had heard hundreds of times before, but this time it was different, cold, calculating. "Oh, Margaret," she said, and I noticed she didn't call me Mom like she usually did. "You missed it. It was yesterday. I thought I had misheard." "I'm sorry, what?" "The wedding. It was yesterday. You missed it." My coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the kitchen floor. "What do you mean I missed it? What are you talking about?" We decided to have a small, intimate ceremony. Just close family and friends. You know, people who are really important to us. The words hit me like physical blows. But I'm David's mother. I helped pay for everything. How could you not invite me?" "Well," Amanda said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "We felt like you might make it about yourself, you know? You can be a bit overwhelming sometimes. We wanted our special day to be peaceful." I stood there in my kitchen, surrounded by broken ceramic and spilled coffee, trying to process what I was hearing. "Can I speak to David, please? He's in the shower." "But he agrees with me, Margaret." We both felt this was the best decision. I hung up the phone and sat down on my kitchen floor, not caring about the coffee soaking through my pajamas or the ceramic pieces cutting into my legs. That's when I realized that, while I was writing checks and transferring money, believing I was building a relationship with my future daughter-in-law, she was planning the most important day of my son's life, without me in it. The worst part wasn't just missing the wedding. It was understanding that I had been paying for my own exclusion. That night, I sat in my empty house, looking at the wedding gift I had bought for them, a beautiful crystal set that cost me $800, and I cried. not just from sadness, but from the humiliation of understanding that I had been financing a celebration that I wasn't worthy to attend. I cried for the mother I thought I was, and the mother I actually was, in their eyes. I cried for the 3 years of believing I was building a family when I was actually just being used as a personal ATM. But most of all, I cried for my son, who had allowed this to happen. The next few days were a blur of confusion and pain. I kept expecting David to call, to explain, to apologize. I imagined him showing up at my door with flowers, telling me it had all been Amanda's idea and that he was sorry, but the call never came. Instead, 3 days later, they both showed up at my house unannounced, looking tanned and relaxed from what I assumed was their honeymoon. Amanda was wearing a beautiful diamond ring that I had never seen before, clearly expensive, clearly purchased with money I had provided. "Hi, Mom," David said, as if nothing had happened. "We brought you some pictures from the wedding." He handed me a photo album, and I flipped through it with trembling hands. There was my son in a beautiful tuxedo, looking happier than I had ever seen him. There was Amanda in a stunning wedding dress that must have cost thousands of dollars. There were about 30 people I didn't recognize, all smiling and celebrating, and there was no empty chair for me, no acknowledgement that anyone was missing. It was as if I had never existed in their lives at all. "It was beautiful," Amanda said, settling onto my couch as if she owned it. "Everything was perfect. Exactly what we dreamed of." I looked at my son, searching his face for some sign of remorse, some indication that he understood how much he had hurt me, but he was looking at the photos with a satisfied smile, pointing out details to Amanda, completely oblivious to my pain. "The flowers were gorgeous," he said, "and the food was incredible. You would have loved it, Mom. Would have loved it, as if I had chosen not to attend instead of being deliberately excluded." That's when something inside me snapped. I spent the next several days trying to understand how I had reached this point. I went through my bank statements, calculating exactly how much I had spent on them over 3 years. The number shocked me. $53,427. Rent payments, $18,000. Car insurance and payments, $12,000. Health insurance, $8,000. Groceries and household expenses, $7,000. Clothing and personal items, $4,000. Entertainment and vacations, $2,000. Wedding expenses, $2,427. I had essentially been supporting 2 adults for 3 years, and in return, I had been excluded from the most important day of my son's life. I began to see the pattern that I had been blind to for so long. Every time I tried to participate in their lives as a mother and mother-in-law, I was treated like an intruder. But when they needed money, I was the first person they contacted. When I suggested family dinners, Amanda would find excuses. When I invited them to events or activities, they were always too busy. When I tried to give advice or share my opinions, I was told I was being controlling or overwhelming. But when their rent was due, when their car broke down, when they wanted to take a vacation they couldn't afford, suddenly I was the most important person in their world. I began to question whether I really had a family or just 2 very skilled manipulators who had learned exactly which emotional buttons to press to open my wallet. The pattern was always the same. David would call me with a worried voice, explaining some financial emergency. Amanda would add dramatic details about how stressed they were, how they had tried everything else, how embarrassed they were to ask. I would feel guilty for having money while they struggled, and within hours the money was in their account. But now I saw the truth. There was no struggling. There was only a very well-orchestrated manipulation designed to keep me as their personal funding source. I realized that every "I love you, Mom" had been calculated. Every "you're like the mother I never had" had been strategic. Every tear, every hug, every moment of apparent gratitude had been performed to ensure the money kept flowing. And I had fallen for all of it. What do you think about what I've shared so far? Have you ever felt used by people you love? Have you ever realized that your generosity was being exploited by those closest to you? Leave your opinion in the comments, because what comes next will show you how far some people are willing to go to maintain control over a source of money. I decided it was time to cut off all financial support and demand explanations about how my money had been used. I needed to understand where $53,000 had actually gone, and I needed to establish some boundaries that should have been in place from the beginning. I called David and asked him to come over for a serious conversation. When he arrived with Amanda in tow, I knew this wasn't going to be easy. "I need to talk to you both about our financial arrangement," I began, trying to keep my voice steady and calm. Amanda immediately tensed up. "What do you mean, financial arrangement? Your family. Family helps each other." "Yes," I said. "Family does help each other, but family also includes each other in important events like weddings." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, we explained that. We wanted something small and intimate. Small and intimate. But you invited 30 people I've never met while excluding the person who paid for most of it?" "You didn't pay for most of it," Amanda snapped, her mask slipping for the first time. "We paid for plenty of things ourselves." "Really?" "Because according to my bank records, I've given you over $53,000 in the past 3 years. I'd like to see receipts and documentation for where that money went." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Amanda's face turned red with anger. "How dare you? How dare you sit there and audit us like we're criminals? You offered to help us. We didn't force you to do anything." "You're right," I said calmly. "I did offer to help, but I offered to help my family, not to be excluded and treated like a stranger." David finally spoke up, but not in the way I had hoped. "Mom, you're being really unfair right now. Amanda's right. You offered to help us, and now you're acting like we owe you something." "I don't think you owe me money, David. I think you owe me respect. I think you owe me honesty. And I think you owe me an explanation for why I wasn't important enough to be invited to your wedding." "Because you would have made it about yourself," Amanda shouted, standing up from her chair. "Everything is always about you, Margaret. Your feelings, your opinions, your need to be involved in every detail of our lives. We wanted one day that was about us, not about managing your emotions." I stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time the person she really was, underneath the sweet, grateful facade she had maintained for 3 years. "Managing my emotions? I've been managing your entire financial life for 3 years. I've been paying your bills, your rent, your insurance, your food. I've been supporting you completely while you built a life that apparently doesn't include me." "We never asked you to do that," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You never asked?" "David, you called me crying about eviction notices. Amanda called me sobbing about medical bills. You both came to me every single month with some emergency that required my immediate financial intervention." "That's different," Amanda said. "That was you being a good mother and mother-in-law. This is you trying to control us with money." The conversation escalated quickly from there. Amanda accused me of being a controlling and possessive mother-in-law who was trying to buy my son's love. She said I was being vindictive and manipulative because they had chosen to be independent. Independent. The word was laughable coming from someone who hadn't paid her own rent in 3 years. David sided with her completely, saying I was overreacting and that I should accept that they were independent adults who had the right to make their own decisions. Independent adults who hadn't paid a single bill in 3 years. When I asked again for receipts and proof of where my money had gone, Amanda became even more furious. She screamed that I had no right to audit their lives, that my money had been a gift, not a loan, and that I was being toxic by trying to control them after the fact. David told me that maybe we needed some space to cool down and think about things. Space. After I had given them everything. That's when I realized I had lost my son to a manipulator who had turned him against me while living off my money. The conversation ended with them storming out of my house, Amanda shouting over her shoulder that I was just like every other controlling mother-in-law, and that they didn't need my toxic energy in their lives. But they would be back. Because toxic energy or not, they still needed my money. The next few weeks were a nightmare of manipulation and emotional warfare. They would show up at my house unannounced, sometimes bringing friends, expecting me to cook and pay for everything as always. When I refused, Amanda would make passive-aggressive comments about how some people change when they get older, and how money really shows you who people truly are. They tried every manipulation tactic in the book. David would call me late at night, his voice slurred with alcohol, telling me how disappointed he was in the mother I had become. He would say things like, "I never thought you were the kind of person who would abandon family over money." Amanda would send me long text messages about how hurt she was by my sudden change in personality. She would remind me of all the times she had told me she loved me, all the moments we had shared, all the ways she had tried to be the daughter I never had, but I had already seen behind the mask. I knew that every tear, every emotional appeal, every "I love you, Mom," was calculated to get me to open my wallet. Again, they tried guilt, telling me that they were struggling without my help and that I was being cruel by cutting them off. They tried anger, accusing me of being vindictive and using money as a weapon. They tried bargaining, promising that if I helped them just one more time, they would pay me back and become truly independent. But I held firm. For the first time in 3 years, I said no, and meant it. Thank you so much for staying with me until this point in the story. I know it's not easy to hear about family manipulation and betrayal, but I promise you the best is yet to come. What I'm about to tell you will show you that sometimes we need to fight for our own dignity, even against those we love most, and that finding the strength to protect yourself can lead to discoveries you never expected. When the emotional manipulation didn't work, they escalated to more serious tactics. I came home from work one day to find them in my house, going through my financial documents. "What are you doing?" I demanded. "We're worried about you, Mom," David said, not even looking embarrassed about being caught snooping through my private papers. "You've been acting so strange lately, so paranoid and suspicious. We think you might need help." Amanda nodded sympathetically. "We've been doing some research, and your behavior fits the pattern of early-stage dementia. The paranoia, the sudden personality changes, the irrational financial decisions." I stared at them in disbelief. "Irrational financial decisions? You mean like stopping the flow of free money to 2 adults who excluded me from their wedding?" "See?" Amanda said to David. "There's that paranoia again. She's obsessing over the wedding thing. It's not healthy." That's when I realized they weren't just trying to manipulate me emotionally anymore. They were trying to question my mental competency. I sought help from a lawyer specializing in family financial abuse. The consultation was eye-opening in ways I hadn't expected. "Mrs. Margaret," the lawyer said after I had told him my story, "what you're describing is a textbook case of financial elder abuse. Even though you're only 58, the pattern is classic. Family members who create financial dependence and then use emotional manipulation to maintain access to money." He explained that financial abuse often escalates when the victim tries to establish boundaries. The abusers will often question the victim's mental capacity as a way to regain control. They may try to have the victim declared incompetent so they can gain legal access to their finances. I discovered that I had rights I didn't know existed. I could demand an accounting of how my money had been spent. I could pursue legal action to recover funds that had been obtained through fraud or misrepresentation. And most importantly, I could protect myself from further abuse. The lawyer helped me change all my bank passwords and cancel any cards that David and Amanda had access to. We installed security cameras around my house and changed all the locks. I opened new bank accounts at a different institution and moved most of my assets there. For the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of my own life. The lawyer also referred me to a support group for family financial abuse victims. I was hesitant at first. I didn't think of myself as an abuse victim. But the first meeting changed my perspective completely. There were 12 people in the group, ranging in age from 45 to 78. Their stories were so similar to mine that it seemed like we were all reading from the same script. There was Patricia, whose daughter had stolen her identity and opened credit cards in her name. There was Robert, whose son had convinced him to sign over power of attorney and then emptied his retirement accounts. There was Linda, whose daughter-in-law had moved into her house temporarily and then refused to leave or pay rent for 2 years. But the most shocking similarity was how the abuse had escalated when they tried to establish boundaries. Almost everyone in the group had been accused of mental incompetency by their abusers. Several had faced legal challenges to their autonomy. "It's the last resort," explained Dr. Sarah Chen, the therapist who facilitated the group. "When emotional manipulation stops working, financial abusers often try to have their victims declared incompetent. It's a way to regain legal control over the money source. I learned that Amanda's behavior wasn't personal. It was a pattern. She had identified me as a source of resources and had systematically worked to ensure that source remained available and isolated. The isolation was something I hadn't fully recognized until the support group pointed it out. Over the 3 years of supporting David and Amanda, I had gradually lost touch with most of my friends. I had stopped dating, stopped traveling, stopped pursuing hobbies that didn't involve them. Every time I had made plans that didn't include them, there would be some emergency that required my immediate attention and financial assistance. Every time I tried to maintain relationships with other people, Amanda would find subtle ways to criticize those relationships or create conflicts that made it easier to just avoid them. I had been systematically isolated from my support network, making me more dependent on David and Amanda for emotional connection, which made me more vulnerable to their financial manipulation. But I also learned something crucial from the support group. I wasn't helping my son by enabling this dynamic. I was actually harming him by preventing him from learning to be truly independent, and by allowing him to be controlled by someone who was using him to access my money. Your son is as much a victim as you are, Dr. Chen explained. Manipulators like Amanda often target people with wealthy or generous family members. They isolate their partners from their families while simultaneously exploiting those family relationships for financial gain. This gave me hope that David might still be salvageable, that underneath the manipulation and control, my real son might still exist. But first, I had to protect myself from what was coming next. The lawyer had warned me that David and Amanda would likely escalate their tactics when they realized I was serious about cutting off financial support. He was right. 2 weeks after I changed my locks and bank passwords, I received a certified letter from an attorney I had never heard of. David and Amanda were suing me, claiming that I had made verbal promises to support them financially, and that cutting off that support constituted breach of contract and elder abuse. They were accusing me of abusing them. The lawsuit claimed that I had promised to support them until they were financially stable, that I had encouraged their dependence on my financial assistance, and that my sudden withdrawal of support was causing them severe emotional and financial distress. They were seeking $50,000 in damages, almost exactly the amount I had given them over 3 years, plus ongoing monthly support payments. But the most shocking part of the lawsuit was the claim that I was mentally incompetent, and that my recent behavior indicated possible dementia or other cognitive impairment. They were asking the court to order a mental competency evaluation, and, if I was found incompetent, to grant them guardianship over my finances. Can you imagine? They wanted to legally force me to continue being their personal bank, and if that didn't work, they wanted to be put in charge of all my money. I was terrified, but I was also angry, angrier than I had ever been in my life. My lawyer assured me that their case was weak. Verbal promises of ongoing financial support are almost impossible to prove, he said, and the fact that they're claiming elder abuse while simultaneously trying to gain control of your finances will not look good to a judge. But we still had to take it seriously. We gathered evidence of the financial abuse I had suffered, bank records showing the pattern of payments, documentation of their wedding expenses that I had paid for while being excluded from the event, records of their attempts to access my financial information without permission. We also arranged for me to undergo a comprehensive mental competency evaluation with a court-approved psychiatrist. The evaluation took 4 hours and included cognitive tests, psychological assessments, and a detailed interview about my life and decision-making processes. The results were unambiguous. I was completely mentally competent, with above-average cognitive function for my age group. The psychiatrist noted that my decision to establish financial boundaries with family members who had been exploiting me showed excellent judgment and appropriate self-protection instincts. Meanwhile, David and Amanda's behavior became increasingly erratic and desperate. They would drive by my house at all hours, sometimes parking outside for hours at a time. They would call me dozens of times a day, leaving increasingly hostile voicemails when I didn't answer. Amanda started showing up at my workplace, causing scenes in the lobby and demanding to speak with me. She would tell anyone who would listen that I was mentally ill and abandoning my family. My colleagues were confused and concerned, and I had to explain the situation to my boss to prevent it from affecting my professional reputation. They also began a campaign of harassment through social media and mutual acquaintances. Amanda created posts on Facebook describing me as a toxic mother-in-law who was using money to control and manipulate her family. She shared details of our private financial arrangements, painting herself as a victim of my emotional abuse. Several people who knew us casually reached out to me, confused by Amanda's posts and concerned about my well-being. It was humiliating to have my private family business aired publicly, but it also helped me see how skilled Amanda was at manipulating narratives to make herself appear sympathetic. The court date was set for 3 months after the lawsuit was filed. Those 3 months were the most stressful of my life, but they were also transformative. With the support of my lawyer, my therapist, and my support group, I began to understand that what had happened to me wasn't my fault. I had been targeted by someone who was skilled at identifying and exploiting generous, loving people. I also began to rebuild the life I had lost during those 3 years of financial and emotional manipulation. I reconnected with old friends, started dating again, and pursued hobbies I had abandoned. For the first time in years, I was living for myself instead of for other people's approval. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I was as ready as I could be. David and Amanda arrived at the courthouse with their lawyer, looking confident and self-righteous. Amanda was dressed conservatively and had adopted a demure, victimized demeanor that I recognized as another performance. But in court, with all the evidence laid out objectively, their case fell apart quickly. The judge reviewed the bank records showing the pattern of financial dependence, the documentation of wedding expenses I had paid for while being excluded from the event, and the evidence of their attempts to access my financial information without permission. When Amanda took the stand to testify about my alleged promises of ongoing support, she couldn't provide any specific dates, witnesses, or documentation. Her testimony was vague and contradictory, and she became visibly frustrated when the judge pressed her for details. David's testimony was even worse. He seemed genuinely confused about basic facts, contradicting both his own previous statements and Amanda's testimony. It was clear that he had been coached by Amanda, but didn't really understand the legal strategy. When I took the stand, I was calm and factual. I presented the timeline of financial support, the escalating requests for money, and the pattern of emotional manipulation that had culminated in my exclusion from their wedding. The judge asked me directly, "Mrs. Margaret, do you believe your son and daughter-in-law deliberately manipulated you for financial gain?" I looked at David, sitting next to Amanda at the defendant's table, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the little boy I had raised. But then Amanda whispered something in his ear, and his expression hardened again. "Your Honor," I said, "I believe my daughter-in-law identified me as a source of financial support and systematically worked to maintain access to that support while isolating me from my son and excluding me from their lives. I believe my son has been manipulated as much as I have, but that doesn't excuse his participation in this abuse." The judge's ruling was swift and decisive. He dismissed their lawsuit completely, finding no evidence of any verbal contract or promise of ongoing support. He noted that the evidence showed a clear pattern of financial abuse against me, not by me. More importantly, he denied their request for guardianship, stating that I was clearly mentally competent and that their attempt to gain control of my finances appeared to be motivated by financial gain rather than genuine concern for my well-being. But the judge's final comments were what really vindicated me. The court finds that Mrs. Margaret showed excellent judgment in establishing financial boundaries with family members who were exploiting her generosity. Her decision to protect her assets and seek legal counsel demonstrates sound mental capacity and appropriate self-advocacy. The legal victory was important, but the personal victory was even more significant. I had stood up for myself against people who had been manipulating and using me for years. I had proven that I was mentally competent and capable of making my own decisions, and I had broken free from a cycle of abuse that could have continued indefinitely. More important than the legal victory was realizing that I had regained my dignity and my sense of self-worth. After the hearing, as we were leaving the courthouse, David approached me alone. Amanda was in the parking lot, screaming into her phone. at their lawyer. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of this." For a moment, I saw my real son again. Not the manipulated puppet that Amanda had created, but the boy I had raised with love and values. "I know you are, David," I said. "But sorry isn't enough anymore. You participated in excluding me from your wedding after I paid for it. You supported Amanda's attempts to question my mental competency. You tried to sue me for money I gave you out of love." He looked down at his feet, unable to meet my eyes. She said you were trying to control us. She said you would never let us be independent as long as we took your money. And did you ever think to talk to me about that? Did you ever think to include me in a conversation about boundaries or independence? Or did you just decide that the best solution was to take my money and exclude me from your life? He didn't have an answer for that. "David, I love you. I will always love you. But I won't be manipulated or used anymore. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on mutual respect and honesty, not on my ability to solve your financial problems." I walked away from him that day, not knowing if I would ever see my son again, but I walked away with my dignity intact and my future in my own hands. 6 months after the trial, David called me. He was alone, without Amanda for the first time in years. "Mom," he said, his voice shaky, "I need to talk to you. Can we meet? Somewhere?" We met at a coffee shop downtown, neutral territory where we could talk without the emotional weight of my house or the memories it contained. David looked terrible. He had lost weight, and there were dark circles under his eyes, but for the first time in years, he looked like himself again. "Amanda left me," he said without preamble. "She found someone else, someone with more money." I felt a mixture of sadness for my son and vindication for myself. "I'm sorry, David. I know you loved her." "Did I?" he asked, staring into his coffee cup. "Or did I love the person she pretended to be? Because looking back now, I can't tell what was real and what was manipulation." For the next 2 hours, we talked more honestly than we had in years. David told me about the ways Amanda had isolated him from me and from his friends. He described how she had gradually taken control of all their financial decisions, how she had convinced him that my generosity was actually a form of control, how she had made him believe that excluding me from their wedding was necessary for their independence. "She said you would make it about yourself," he said. "She said you would try to control every detail and that we needed to establish boundaries. But now I realize that she was the one who wanted to control everything. She didn't want you there because she knew you would see through her act." He told me about the months after the trial, how Amanda had become increasingly angry and abusive when the money stopped flowing, how she had blamed him for losing me as a financial resource, how she had started looking for other sources of support, eventually finding a wealthy older man who was willing to fund her lifestyle. "She left me the day she moved in with him," David said. "She took everything, furniture, electronics, even things that belonged to me before we got together. She said I owed her for all the time she had wasted on me." I reached across the table and took my son's hand. "David, I'm sorry you went through that, but I'm glad you're free of her. I don't know how to make this right with you, Mom," he said, tears in his eyes. "I don't know how to apologize for what I did, for what I let her do to you." "You start by acknowledging what happened," I said. "You acknowledge that you participated in excluding me from your wedding after I paid for it. You acknowledge that you supported her attempts to question my mental competency. You acknowledge that you tried to sue me for money I gave you out of love." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I acknowledge all of that, and I'm ashamed of all of it. And then you commit to never letting anyone manipulate you into treating me that way again. You commit to building a relationship with me based on honesty and respect, not on financial dependence. I want that," he said. "I want my mom back. I want to be your son again, not Amanda's puppet." It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight. Rebuilding trust, after such a profound betrayal, takes time and consistent effort from both parties. David started therapy to understand how he had been manipulated and to develop better boundaries in relationships. He got a better job and moved into his own apartment, determined to prove that he could be truly independent. We started having dinner together once a week, just the two of us. We talked about everything: his childhood, my divorce from his father, his relationship with Amanda, my experience with financial abuse. We were honest with each other in ways we had never been before. Slowly, carefully, we rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection, rather than financial dependence. Today, 2 years after the trial, David and I have a stronger relationship than we've ever had. He's dating someone new, a woman who has her own career and her own money, who encourages his relationship with me, rather than trying to undermine it. He's never asked me for money since that day in the coffee shop, and I've never offered. When he got promoted at work, he called to share the good news, not to ask for financial help. When he moved to a better apartment, he saved up for the deposit himself. He's learned to be truly independent for the first time in his adult life, and I've learned to be a mother who loves without enabling. As for me, I've built a life that's richer and more fulfilling than anything I had during those 3 years of financial manipulation. I've traveled to places I always wanted to see, but never made time for when I was busy funding other people's dreams. I've started volunteering with organizations that help elderly victims of family financial abuse, sharing my story to help others recognize the signs I ignored for so long. I've made new friends who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. I've started dating again, and I've learned to recognize the difference between someone who wants to be with me and someone who wants to use me. Most importantly, I've learned that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. I've learned that true love doesn't exclude, doesn't manipulate, and doesn't use. True love doesn't come with a price tag or emotional blackmail. I've learned that generosity without boundaries can become a weapon used against you, and that sometimes the people closest to us can become our greatest predators. But I've also learned that it's never too late to reclaim your life, your dignity, and your sense of self-worth. This was my story about how I discovered that generosity without limits can be interpreted as weakness, and that some people see kindness as an opportunity for exploitation. But it's also the story of how I learned to love myself enough to demand respect, how I found the courage to stand up to people who were using me, and how I rebuilt my life on a foundation of self-respect, rather than other people's approval. Now I want to know, could you forgive a child who excluded you from their own wedding after you paid for the party? How would you react if you discovered you were financing your own humiliation? Have you ever been in a situation where your generosity was exploited by people you trusted? Tell me in the comments what you think about this situation. Have you ever been through something similar? How did you handle family manipulation? What would you do if you found yourself in my position? If this story touched you in some way, if it made you think about your own relationships or your own boundaries, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss other real stories about family, manipulation, and overcoming challenges. And don't miss the next video, where I'll tell you about a grandmother who discovered that her daughter-in-law was selling the gifts she gave to her grandchildren and using the money to fund a gambling addiction. It's a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family, loyalty, and the lengths some people will go to exploit the love of others. Remember, true love doesn't have a price. Your dignity is not negotiable, and you are never too old to start over or too kind to deserve respect. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, sometimes losing a toxic family is the first step toward finding your authentic self. The greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to demand the respect you deserve, even from those you love most.